Welcome to FranklinCovey's Leading Through Uncertainty, the podcast to help business leaders navigate the pressures of AI and unpredictable markets with bold, creative solutions. I'm your host, Patrick Leddin, and through my research and years of experience, I've studied how disruption can leave organizations in the dust if not handled properly. Over the course of 6 episodes, we will cover topics such as task prioritization, skill building, resilient cultures, and more. Because doing what's always been done won't just hold businesses back, it could leave them behind. In fact, it's time to act different to emerge different. Today, we will be discussing the power of priorities with FranklinCovey's VP of Content Development and best-selling author, Kory Kogon. Kory, welcome to the program.
Hi, Patrick. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
So good to see you. You and I have been friends and colleagues for a number of years. I'm excited for the listeners to have a chance to hear your insights. Folks, I really encourage you to focus on what Kory has to say today, because she's going to give you some great nuggets and thoughts and perspectives, I think, that'll help all of us along the way. As we were prepping for this conversation to Kory, one thing we jotted down in our show notes was we wanted to ask you this question right out the gate and have you kind of take off from there. It was this idea about, can you think of a moment where a shift in priorities completely transformed an initiative or a project? And if so, what led to that shift?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's how you define priorities, because the priority could be the initiative. So that's sort of an interesting way to look at it. These it's so cyclical. I mean, there's so many to choose from. And I can go back into my previous company before FranklinCovey, where we wanted to stand out it was a printing industry, global printing company, and we wanted to stand out. And printing is a bit of a commodity, and we decided to implement ISO 9000 worldwide. And that was a pretty big shift. And again, was that the priority, or was that the initiative? But the priority was to differentiate ourselves out there from others. And it was a very big undertaking for the company. So it touched everybody in the organization, and it really transformed how we did business. It wasn't just for the label of ISO 9000, and it really made a difference in who we are, even that company, through today.
One thing I love about talking to you, Kory, is right out the gate, when I ask you a question, you help me kind of focus on the question and make it tighter. And I love that. So let's parse apart what you just said for a moment. When you talked about it, when I said to you, can you share a moment when a shift in priorities completely transformed an initiative or project? And you said, well, it depends how you define priorities. And I'll ask you that question. When you think about individuals that you have a chance to work with around the world, literally in your role, as well as teams and organizations, I mean, what have you learned about how they define their own priorities?
Well, do you have a few hours?
I absolutely do. Hopefully the listeners do.
Yeah. Leaders are paid to have great ideas. And so sometimes that turns into priorities, which is okay. A lot of people are confused about priorities, but when it comes to what priorities should be, and not always are the most important things that an organization needs to do in order to fulfill their mission, vision, and if there's a strategy to get there. And some people, leaders, will define priorities sometimes as things that they feel they should do without maybe checking in to see if it totally connects with what the rest of the organization does. And like you, I'm sure people that are listening to this are smiling a little bit, because when you have enough leaders who are defining priorities like that, I'm paid to have a lot of good ideas, so let's try this, let's try that, without taking a beat and really understanding how it connects, that's when the people on their team are like, there's a new priority every day. We don't know where we're going. They keep changing things on us. And if you want to talk about uncertainty, even in the best of times, that puts us at 99.9% uncertainty all of the time, let alone when we're in turbulent times like now. So the ideal, definition that I hear from leaders and people around, and I'm talking about obviously business priorities, are those things that they go, here's a really good idea, and or here's what's flowing from the top of the organization. I'm going to make sure my good idea connects with, what we're trying to do to help the outcome of the company. And when something comes down as new priorities from the top, I'm going to make sure I have clarity on what the intent is, the why, because my team is waiting to hear what we're doing in a way that can keep them calm, cool, and collected. So I hope that answered your question.
No, it does. It does. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking, there, as you describe that, it's like there's the uncertainty that we're all feeling in general. That's the reason of a podcast like this and the conversation about how do I act differently amidst this uncertainty to, emerge differently on the other side of it, whatever that might look like. But then there's also the kind of the world does it to us. And then there's also a little bit of we do it to ourselves. So if I'm in a team in an organization, I'm kind of could be getting a double whammy, right? Where I have the uncertainty externally happening in an organization that might be shifting our market and changing things, whether it's an AI or some other shift, whatever it might be. But then I also have a lack of clarity sometimes or changing priorities that creates uncertainty within a team because we don't quite know, is the goal on Monday still going to be the goal come Wednesday?
Exactly. And, again, we're happy to be here and, we're in my window's out here. That's why, I'm looking out there. But it's crazy, it's crazy times now. Everything, we're not sure what's happening out there. I think for people, the best thing that they can do for themselves and for their team and for their organization is in the best of times, learn how to be really good at uncertainty. And organizations should, and again, teams of leaders should really do this in the best of times so that they're prepared when we enter times like now with all the headwinds, that an organization is facing, that they're not scrambling like, oh my God, how do we deal with uncertainty? And, Patrick, you're going to have millions of people that are going to read your new book, coming out on September 29th. And that's great. And I hope people that are not in pain of uncertainty read it now. I mean, it's almost like, you got to get in shape, right? We go to the gym to get in shape so, we can go find a date or whatever the reason, might be. And it's the same thing here. I think you should build your uncertainty muscle because you can. And then be prepared for the turbulence versus let's wait for the turbulence and then see what we need to do to fix it.
So what would you say to if I said, Kory, if I was listening and I said, Kory, I completely get that. I should have been prepared, but guess what? We didn't. And now we're in it. And I'm in the midst of this right now. And I feel like I'm in the throes of the so much uncertainty. It's just like a ship rocking in the open ocean. What could I do if I'm leading that team, for example, to start to even, hey, in the midst of this, here's some things you can anchor to. How do I help them create some clarity and maybe even some better alignment when I can see the entire team around me is kind of moving about in the waves?
Well, so there's two ways to go with this, and we know they both exist, and there's in between on a Likert scale as well. You have a leader who, all right, we hear them out there today in the world, just suck it up, excuse my language, just suck it up and get it done. Or listen, you don't have a choice, this is your job, just do it. That is not the way to do it. I'm going to stand by regardless of what the world is doing now. And, there are different schools of thought on what great leadership is. Sustainable superior outcomes, which is one of our components of greatness, occurs when you have leaders who realize that they have people with hearts and minds and feelings on their team and are willing to take the time and what it takes. It's a great investment to have the empathy, to have the patience and the skill to help them understand their reactions to change and understand how to help them get through disruptions without being terrified and potentially helping them, even in the midst of it, build the muscle and the excitement actually to say, you know what, now I have my arms around change. I see the opportunities and I can see how I can thrive through it and look for it and embrace it and make change happen because I see there's outcomes that can occur. I'll close the loop on that and say what I don't want to create is a whole group of people that have a whole bunch of big ideas again that they're just going out and doing, but that the period at the end of the sentence is that are aligned to their life, their world, their work. So that's what a leader needs to do.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was reminded of a number of years ago when you were working on developing some content at FranklinCovey. This became part of a piece of content at FranklinCovey, but it really stuck with me when I heard you say it this day. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. But these three words: pause, clarify, and decide.
Yes.
And I think that for many people, whether they're feeling the throes of uncertainty or it's right around the corner, I feel like that those three words are really beneficial words to kind of get in their vernacular and maybe even turn it into a bit of a mantra that they follow, whatever they want to call it. Would you mind, Kory, just explaining that and why it matters and how people can kind of use it?
Yeah. And it's I love talking about it. And now everything I'm doing with every group that I'm talking to, and even in, with the work that we're all doing, you and I and, our team are doing on uncertainty, I insist on putting this piece at the beginning of the conversation. Because, we can tell people all day long, well, you should be a better collaborator. You should be, do better with your team on uncertainty. This goes back to Stephen Covey's work on mindsets. Honestly, until somebody, a leader or an individual contributor, the individual contributor could be terrified about change. The leader could be, I just need them to do their job. All of us need to stop and take a beat and breathe. Stephen said there's a space between stimulus and response. And the idea is, how do we become self-aware to step back, and for the leader who is like, hey, just get it done, how do we help that leader step back, examine that paradigm, and think, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way. And how can we help them? We can't tell people how to think, but how can we help that leader see something different? Or any human being that is terrified of the uncertainty, step back, take a deep breath, and, think about, all right, wait a minute. And if for those people that know circle of influence, circle of concern, there's things I can't do a thing about. Let me just set those aside, take a deep breath, and think about what are the things I can do something about. And once I start thinking there, then that's my pause. Like I'm counting to 10. And then I'm clarifying, okay, what can I do something about? Let me understand the change. Let me talk to my boss. Let me just, get clear on all of that. And then I can figure out how I'm moving forward. So this, again, you're asking a small question that has such big implications on the idea of self-awareness, to step back from the reaction of being terrified, or even if I'm excited about change, or some people are, and sometimes they move too fast, like, oh, wow, let's do it, and they mess things up. But how do I just get self-aware, step back for a minute, count to 10, and think about where do I have some control, and what can I do, or who can I go to talk to, and, about this, and as a leader, let me just be open-minded to learning about what are some of the skills of empathy and collaboration that I can use with my team to take them through change. So pause, clarify, discern moves us to a better place.
I just love it. I mean, you have saved me a lot of probably heartache and apologies by knowing pause, clarify, and decide, and just making better decisions. That one word, that clarify word. So the pause piece, okay, I could kind of train myself to take a deeper breath, to step back, to separate stimulus from response. I can train myself to do that. The clarify piece is an interesting one in a lot of ways, but specifically, sometimes as a leader, we feel like, especially when time is pressure, because uncertainty and times of uncertainty or disruption or change can make that can compress time. So we feel like we have to respond. And then we add to that the level of, oftentimes as a leader, we think like we're supposed to have the answers. Right. So this idea of clarifying has to show a degree of like self-awareness and vulnerability, where I'm able to say, okay, I don't have the answers, and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to ask a few questions, whether it's going to my boss or whoever I report to, however you say it in your own organization, folks, but going to that person and asking a question that might reveal something to them that might make them question my knowledge or something. Well, I'm willing to do that. By the way, some bosses will think that's really great that you're asking them questions, folks. Don't always lean into thinking it's going to be
That's
negative,
right.
right? And the same thing with your people. I found like when I pause and clarify with my teammates and I reveal that I don't know the answer to something, a lot of times, you know what? They actually are rooting for me. They want to see me figure this out. So they're willing to help. So just could you give us a little bit more thoughts on clarify? And especially as you do, Kory, would you talk a little bit about why the deeper purpose and values really matter? Because we're clarifying not just the situation, but the situation in context of the organization or our team and where we're trying to go.
Yeah, and everything you said sort of excuse me, answers a lot of that question. I have a number of thoughts running through my head. I know I'm going to forget most of them as I start talking about it. We have a lot of tools. I always like to say, with tools that we provide, that we're not providing tools, whether in our courses or whatever, when we're not training people to fill out forms. They're thinking tools. So I just want to preface this when I say around our change work and uncertainty, we have tools for leaders to work in that space between stimulus and response. And some of the questions in there are exactly what you're saying. Before I talk to the team, let me clarify. Do I know what I need? Do I know what it's for? Do I know what the benefits are? Do I know how it's connecting to the mission vision of the organization? Do I know the why in the big picture? One of my favorite questions for anybody to ask before I have the conversation is, what questions might they ask me that I'm not prepared to answer? What question scares me the most that they're going to ask, so that I can at least go be prepared with some things that I think might come up and go find the answers to that. So that's, whether it's a tool or you do that in your head, that gives guidance, for some of that. Your point about vulnerability, and you know me, Patrick, I'm not a fluffy, whatever. I'm very black and white. I'm to the point. Would people call me vulnerable? My close friends would. People that see me from a distance, I know the people, our team is on this call watching us, is laughing. But see, I know you wanted to, so I wanted you to get that out. People who know me, that are close to me, I can be vulnerable. And I can even be a little touchy-feely, kind of thing. Why am I saying that? Because there is nothing more important than a leader or an individual contributor, all humans, saying, listen, if I don't know the answer, I don't know everything. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to find it out. And to your point, Patrick, about what happened to you, where they're then they root for you. They need to see you as human. Yeah. And so it's really important, as part of this uncertainty, we don't know all the answers. And even our own company is going through this. And we had a call yesterday about some changes that are being made. The leader who spoke did a wonderful job and said, here's what I know. Hit me with everything you got. And if I don't have all the answers, but I will get them for you. And we know him to do that. So everybody felt very safe in the conversation and felt safe enough to ask questions. So it's, in the last piece that you had brought up, this has frustrated me my entire executive career, and some of it's my own fault because I'm very black and white, I'm to the point, and until people get to know me, perhaps they're a little intimidated by me. My New York upbringing, I'm out of New York, and it's just who I am as well. And Patrick, my younger sister, if you think I'm intimidating, you should talk to my sisters who are in New York, in the New York, vibe. Why am I saying that to you? I have always been, besides the fact that I don't have to have all the answers, I have always been frustrated, again, partially my fault, when people are fearful of asking questions, or feel like they're going to look silly for asking questions. I hear it all the time, particularly when we do work around project management, and we say to the project manager, you must talk to key stakeholders for the same reasons we're talking about this here. You've got to clearly define the project. You need to talk to key stakeholders way up in the organization, and they're like, oh, but I don't want to talk to them. They're going to think I don't. I'm like, you need the answers. If you come to me with the right question, I'm going to give you my attention. So that is another big watch out for people. As long as, if somebody said to me, Kory, hey, do you have some time? I have some questions. We have a project. Want to, I'm busy. But if they're like, Kory, this project, here we go to your question about values and mission and vision. We're doing this project because it's going to help increase our revenue goal of 10% for blah. And I need, really need your insight to see what pieces we should be including from your area. I'm like all ears. Because now we're all on the same page. So how you ask the question, you'll get answers. But the people who are afraid to ask up is a terrible thing. I'll stop talking.
No, that's wonderful. And I'm impressed, by the way, because I did have about 4 points in that question, and you hit them all, which is, again, I told you, folks, she's going to nail these. She's going to focus and hit the right things as we go along. As you were saying that, you said, being able to say, I don't have all the answers, I think is a really critical thing. And sometimes when you're talking to your boss, for example, doing a stakeholder interview for a project, guess what? They don't have all the answers sometimes too. You're actually asking them some things that cause them to pause and reflect and decide in new ways.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
What people don't there's leaders out there with egos, but we can't let the one that comes up from time to time, there's not as many totally toxic organizations as people think. Leaders generally want to do a good job. And so, most leaders will say, that's a really good question. I should know the answer. It would be helpful to me. I'll get it for you. Don't be deterred by the one whose ego gets in the way, because for that one, there's another 5 out there that won't do that to you.
That's so true. And even of the ones that'll do it, there's some that'll come around later on and say, I probably should have done it.
Right.
So, it's even a smaller number, really, when you think about it. That's so true. But it's easy to kind of frame the boogeyman or the one out there. And we all have had, if you've been on the planet long enough, you've had an experience with that one. So therefore, we can all relate to it sometimes too. But you're right. Let's give each other a little grace here. There's a lot of people out there who want to do some great things. One thing we don't know, we all don't know that much about, but we know it's out there. We hear it talked about all the time. And certainly when we talk about uncertainty and we talk about productivity and we talk about priorities, we can't help not saying something that involves the word AI or the phrase AI. So I know that you were at ATD not that long ago and you had a chance to speak about AI. I'd just love to hear kind of what you talked about and in general, and specifically when it comes to AI, like what concerns do you see or what opportunities do you see? I'd just love to have you kind of riff a little bit about what's going on and how AI might be creating uncertainty, but maybe also some clarity for us.
Well, I'm a human too. And so I've been on this journey just like the rest of the world, like AI. It's funny. I remember reading, I was always interested. I was a science major in school. And I must be 35 years ago. I had a book on a scholarly journal on the introduction of artificial intelligence. And I just recently have been thinking back to that. I could barely understand what it was saying, but just, where it was and where it's come to, I always found it to be a fascinating thing. And this stuff science fiction movies were made of. And here we are today. And I, like everybody else, have had to go through this learning curve. And when I open the news and I read that yesterday that whatever the program was wouldn't close itself and was blackmailing, trying to blackmail people to not close, that's the scarier side of AI. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But AI in general, I think so. It's terrified a lot of people. The big thing that keeps coming up is, is it going to, I'm going to lose my job. Mm-hmm. So let's go there first, right? There's a lot of that, and it's some of what I talked about, but I just want to get that off the table. And a lot of presenters at ATD, and interesting, there were, for those of you who know, ATD is gigantic. There were 50 sessions that were about AI. And in the expo, there were 60 vendors that had AI products. So if you don't think it's here, it's here, and in a very big way. Yesterday, I was talking to a client who said they just hired a chief AI officer. So it's here. The job thing, everybody at ATD, the sessions that I went to, first thing dispelled how that's working. Yes, there's going to be a loss of thousands of jobs. They're talking about the whole frontline entry level job, thing. But there is so much research around by 2030, the multiple of jobs will be out there available based on all the new things that are required from a human point of view along with AI. So I'm not giving you specific numbers here. I think it was something like by even up to this year, that they would lose maybe, I'm going to throw bad numbers out here, 25 million jobs, but 97 million jobs would be created. So, there's a lot of that research out there. So people need to sort of calm down on that. If they don't calm down on that, and this is some of what I talked about, is if they don't calm down on that, if they don't get into their circle of influence, they're going to circle of concern themselves out of their own job. Because some people are so worried about it that they keep talking about it and keep complaining about it and keep shying away from it. And they're like, well, I'm going to get fired and whatever. And before you know it, they're out of a job because they haven't skilled up. They haven't joined the march. They're not proactively learning. And the company is shedding those that are not on board. And that person, it's cyclical. If you know our see-do-get model, they've talked themselves out of the job where they're like, see, I told you, I'm going to lose my job because of AI. So the real topic is AI and human capability, really understanding the opportunities that we have, to your point, around disrupt everything. And really, what do you want out of your life? And our life with AI, there's something to be had there. So let me just pause there because I said a mouthful and I could carry on if you are ready for me.
No, well, actually, I want to make a comment and just hear your thoughts on this in regard to when you talked about like people feeling like it's the elephant in the room for a lot of people, like, is my job going to go away? What's going to happen? I was actually having just a one-on-one conversation with somebody the other day who was expressing some concern about AI because AI, he could see AI was starting to do some things that in the past he'd been paid to do. And he's like, how's that going to happen? And he was fearful, and he was kind of making the straw man argument about why AI, is bad and we shouldn't work with it at all, type of thing. Like we need to go backward. And I just, as I was talking to him, I said something like, do you see a world with AI where you can actually be more valuable to the company, not less valuable to the company? And we talked about that for a few moments. By the time it was done, I'd say he convinced himself in about 3 minutes that, yeah, there is a world, but I need to move from that circle of concern you talked about all those things I can't do anything about, into my circle of influence where I can start proactively doing some thif And I think it was just that little switch. And does that work for every person? No, everybody's situation is different, but I would say sizably, many people, including myself at times, if we're more learning oriented and more recognizing like, hey, let's explore what this means, because there might be some great opportunities in here, can find some cool things that allow us to live that good life we talked about.
Right. And so that was the platform to say, let's really examine AI and human capability, because the two, we call it synergistic intelligence, because at least at this point in time, and I believe for the foreseeable future, you cannot leave AI alone. What we do know is that AI, we have some stats on this, can improve and is improving productivity, particularly Gen AI, by 40%. And it has the capability to drop productivity by 19%. Why? Because if we just leave AI to do everything by itself, it's going to create a mess. It's not perfect. It makes mistakes. And actually, I was reading this morning, interesting dichotomy, the better AI is getting, the more mistakes it's making, because it's taking more risks, and whatever. So it's uncovering more, not that it's bad work, but I think it's more sophisticated mistakes that are happening. Doesn't mean it's ethical or bad or deadly, but regardless, the humans, we keep talking about prompts. It all starts, any work automation, any agent, everything has to start with prompts. And so who's building the prompts? And I'm sure AI will, is polishing prompts and all of that. But the inputs and the outputs continue to need to be done by humans. We do know that those employees who are skilled in AI which a lot of the new people coming into the workforce are, and organizations won't hire you unless you have AI skills. Those people with AI skills are the ones who are screaming the loudest for skills like collaboration, creativity, vision, integrity, all those kinds of things, and are screaming for the leaders who know how to lead those skills with people to really be able to have this integration of human capability, which can't go away, but it needs to be improved, and AI to have the best outcomes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about what leaders, how's that influencing the way that they're going to have to use their time and their resources? And you spoke to one of those right there, because I would say that the people, let's just say for discussion, and it's not all like all the new people coming into the workforce feel this way, and it's not necessarily that at all, but there is a segment of the workforce, whether they're coming in new or existing, and they've been existing for a long time, that are seeing value in AI and are demanding more collaboration and communication and those type of opportunities, because they realize we get work done as humans together. And then there may be a segment of people that, whether they're new workers coming in or existing workers, that are a little bit resistant or reluctant to AI. So the ability, I'd love to just hear your thoughts as a leader. Like, I'm in the midst of all this, and I've got I gave you 2 segments. There's probably 20 segments, but there's all these different mindsets around AI and how people are behaving. How do I kind of orchestrate that? How do I like take that group that's concerned, like I'm going to lose my job, and have a conversation with them that's real? Or how do I, to help them think it through? And how do I talk to the new people and say, let's talk about, what do you mean by collaboration? What would you suggest I do when I'm looking at this team and say, okay, how do I serve them best right now?
Well, again, we're back to the question of this whole podcast is, how do you deal with uncertainty? Because this is the biggest uncertainty right now for people. They're not sure. It's a change. And so how do we help people through the change? And, again, you talk about this in your book. That integrates with our work on, our change model, to say, first of all, as a leader, I'll go back to what I said earlier. The leader has to come to this with a mindset of good people skills, of empathy, where they know if they're going to expect a lot of their people, they need to care a lot about their people, which is one of our mantras now, that you need that balance. And they need to be able to listen. They need to be communicating as a coach with them, not being the authoritative, just do it because I said so. So I just want to, say those, that is foundational. 50 years we've been talking about these kinds of leaders. It is more important now than ever before, as we do really see people exiting the workforce because of something that's replacing them. Having said that, with my team, if I have a foundation of self-awareness and those tools, and you think about some of the cycles of change, it's okay, why is the change happening? What is AI? There's so many different things out there to talk about. Do they understand what AI is? Is there something as a team we can try out together to see how it works and how it can help us? So again, what are the benefits for the people in front of me? How do I show them how it works, where it's going to benefit them? How do I dispel some of the fears around what the organization is going to do with AI? So do I, as a leader, know from the top down what's going on, so I know how to have this conversation? And how do I help them through the disruption of the change, where they're just, okay, I'll try something. And they're like, okay, I'm in. We call that the point of decision, in a change curve. Like, okay, I'll give it a try. And they give something a try, and they, we call this a zone of adoption. They try something out, and this is where change fails. They try something out, and they're like, oh, that didn't work. AI didn't help me. This is terrible. And we, in the zone of adoption, we say there's a squiggly line there. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Because when you try something out, how many times have you tried to be perfect with your first try on anything, Patrick, with your whole background and stuff like that in the military and, all the things that you've done, working with. I have been imperfect every time I've tried to be perfect. That's just the way it rolls. Well, and particularly the first time out. And I'll just give you a very quick example. We switched over from Dropbox to, SharePoint a couple of years ago. I was screaming around that. because it was a big I mean, is it a big deal? It was sort of, for me, it was a big deal because I had everything all set up in Dropbox. And then the next thing you know, it's SharePoint. Well, I tried something, it didn't work. I closed it up. I didn't revisit it for a couple of weeks. And I'm like, oh, I can't do this. And I was a little ashamed of myself. Shame is a very big word when it comes to change and uncertainty. That will stop an initiative in its tracks if leaders don't realize that. And so in this zone of adoption, the leader needs to be there really to engage with their people to help them through when it doesn't work the first time, if that makes sense.
No, it makes
and
perfect
really
sense.
help them practice and give like, hey, listen, you know how to do this. You've done other things like this really well. Let's give it another try. Let's work on the prompt and we'll get you. And the good news is once somebody goes, wow, that prompt, oh my gosh, that just got me what I need in like 15 seconds. And it would take me 2 days. I think I'm in. And the next thing you know, you've created this flywheel, a virtuous cycle where people are like, I'm in, let me try something else. And the next thing you know, you've taken your team to innovation because now they're so good, they're looking for other things. And that actually, just to connect to your work, Patrick, turns them into somebody who may want to help disrupt everything.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, right. And
No.
really take it to the next level of being very proactive in their roles and when it comes to change and really moving through a cycle, to achievement and refinement.
Well, Kory, a few moments ago, you said like the leader needs to be there. And I liked how you said that because as I was listening to you say that, I thought, I'm just so glad that Kory decided to be here today to talk to us, to share some ideas with the listeners, because your perspective on AI and the priorities really is invaluable, especially in a time where disruption is shaping the future and leaders aren't quite sure about how to make decisions or how to operate with your team. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank those who are listening to our conversation today. Kory mentioned Disrupt Everything. Let me give you a little background and one particular nugget that most people don't know. When you pick that book up, folks, and read it, which if you do, great. I'd love that. There's a chapter in there where I tell a story about a change I made in my life, and somebody gave me some feedback and paused me to cause me to do that. And Kory was that person. So if you read that change about how I changed my relationship with my parents even, it came from a conversation that Kory delivered. FranklinCovey currently is offering a keynote on Disrupt Everything based on the book that I wrote with James Patterson. Yep, that James Patterson. We also have executive sessions we do, and we're working on a course that's going to come out a little bit later this year. The title of it at this moment is called From Disruption to Innovation, which we're really excited about. So for more details about that, check out the show notes for the links. Check out the show notes for the links to that information. And really thank you again for joining me today. And thanks, Kory, so much for helping us think about how to lead through uncertainty. I'm Dr. Patrick Leddin. That's all we have for today. Now go make it a great day.